Chapter 50 The Blood Oath. Renice. The uninvited guests caused quite the ruckus at Driftmark. After a day of sailing, Renice hadn't expected Prince Aemond and Lady Harriel to knock on her door late last evening. Once given the hospitality of her castle, a late evening meal and rooms fitting of their station, Renice hadn't expected they'd attempt to sneak out after bedtime either. Fortunately, Renice wasn't born yesterday. She hadn't forgotten how Aemond once snuck away and nearly got her son killed by Vhagar for his efforts. This time she made sure guards were stationed by their doors and windows, which is why the lad was barely 3 steps down the hallway before getting caught, then marched before Renice. Prince Aemond couldn't pretend he wasn't up to something either. He was fully dressed for cold weather, and once caught, Lady Harriel appeared in the chamber of her own accord. The way she seemed to emerge out of shadows gave Renice a fright, and then she wondered how. No one had noticed she was missing to begin with. Neither the bedmate Renice had assigned her, Lady Valena Velaryon, nor the guards knew she was missing until she turned herself in. After a little more poking, they admitted the true purpose of their nighttime strolls. It was not, as Renice first assumed, that they were sneaking away for an illicit dalliance together. In a matter of speaking, she was wrong, and in another, she hit a nail on the head. The dalliance seemed to have already happened at a previous date, because the kids suddenly had a need to get married. Her first reaction was exasperation, even anger. But after taking a moment to consider the situation that dragged her out of bed in the hour of the eel, Renice concluded it could have been worse. The two were betrothed, and it's not like they were running off to marry different people to create a political nightmare of spurned alliances. But this was not well thought out either. There was indeed a sept in the town of Driftmark, but even if they had been able to sneak away from the castle unseen, they wouldn't have been able to marry on this night because the septon was sick. Their expression when she informed them of this was stunned disappointment. Even though Aemond's contemplating expression made her wonder if the prince may try to drag the feverish septon out of bed to perform the ceremony regardless of his condition. If I wasn't misinformed, you're to be wed in a year. Why the sudden urgency? Why the secrecy? Is this out of necessity? Renice allowed her disappointment to slip onto her face, for all the good it did her. The young lady kept acting as if she wasn't following. Renice dropped her gaze, lingering meaningfully on her stomach. If I offered you a beverage of moon tea on the morrow, brewed discreetly of course, would there be the same rush to marry afterwards? Pardon? The prince bristled. Are you too far along? Renice guessed. It'd be Harriel first babe, so she may be several moons along even if it didn't show. You should not have participated on the Maiden's Day then, Lady Harriel. I know you don't hold to the gods as some others, but that's a great insult to— Don't mistake me for some of our shared kin, the prince objected angrily while his betrothed flushed a fetching shade of pomegranates. After watching their failures, I know why it'd be witless to follow such examples. Did he speak of Aegon or Rhaenyra there? Whichever it was, Renice didn't believe it. The two insisted there wasn't a dragon seat on the way, and that they simply wanted to marry for love. A likely tale. Mayhaps admitting they needed moon tea was beyond Aemond's pride to admit, but Renice already knew how difficult it was to procure in winter. Moon tea was made by brewing several specific plants: tansy, mint, wormwood, pennyroyal, flora which neither grew nor thrived in the years of frost and snow. Whichever ingredients available for winter were either shipped from southern parts of the Reach, regions of Dorne, or from Essos. Trade was the bedrock of House Velaryon's wealth, and their house did a fair bit of business in some of these areas. It's how Renice happened to have some of it on hand, though it had driven the prices up exponentially. The ingredients had other purposes used outside of moon tea, but even their stock was starting to dry out. Still, it was better than what some desperate ladies resorted to during winter. She'd heard of moon tea made of poor quality plants, or reckless ladies who made do with only half the ingredients in a concoction that wasn't effective for much except making the woman sick, or potentially causing long-term harm. Then there was the brewing itself. No maester would provide moon tea for a lady betrothed to a prince while keeping such quiet. Firstly, they'd tell the lord of the castle they served, and secondly, they were prone to gossip about it with their order of maesters back at Old Town. They were cautious enough not to use names, at least in writing, but much could be uncovered through contextual clues too. Renice was tempted to call them out on their blatant lying, making it bothersome to hold her tongue. Yet still, Lady Harriel had been a good friend to Lenor. She'd made him an unburnt, and in doing so, had Renice not gotten 4 more years to spend with her son? In their own way, the kids were trying to rectify their mistake, though they were going about it the wrong way. If they simply explained matters to the hand of the king, she was sure he'd have them married as discreetly and quickly as possible, because Sir Otto Hightower would never allow the kids' inability to restrain themselves grow into a fully living and breathing bastard. Another reason she held her tongue was plainly because it behooved her to do so. She held no love for Aemond, and didn't like her cousin enough to go out of her way for him. However, in Aemond's great impatience to secure the hand of the magical Lady Harriel, he was also doing Renice quite a convenient favor. With Bella married to a mangled mess that may die any day, it left her granddaughter's position uncertain and weak, all the more so when the shadow of the second son, Prince Aemond, was looming over the situation. The lad held little regard for his elder brother, as she had heard tales of how rude Aemond was towards Bella. He had never treated Renice's granddaughters with the respect they deserved. His dragon was Vermiford, Jaehaerys' dragon, the dragon of the king who once robbed Renice of her birthright. The boy was a threat. The only thing that worked against Aemond was his betrothal to Harriel. As magical dragon riders, she and Lord Rubius were a powerful ally in some ways, but the lady was simultaneously an unsuited candidate for queen too. Yet here Aemond stood, the love-struck fool too impatient to grow up to realize he was inadvertently aiding Renice, that he was weakening his political support with his marriage, taking a significant step to secure the dwindling strength of Aegon's claim, and through him, securing Bella. That was the part that gave Renice pause. In truth, what Renice wanted was to tell the kids to get lost. Make it crystal clear she would not be involved with Viserys or his children again. That she'd not be dragged into one more of their uncountable mistakes, selfish evils and short-sighted schemes. That they had taken everything she loved. That even though all Renice had planned for the morrow was to stare into the fireplace and daydream of feeding Daemon to Meleese, that still counted as time better spent than aiding this ridiculous wedding stunt. Yet instead of the myriad of insults she could throw in their faces to send them packing, she cocked her head and offered to solve all their problems. The Septon is sick, Renice repeated the main obstacle to their bare-boned ploy. A Septa arrived from Hull to inform us that the Septon took ill after lending aid to a ship from the Vale that sought shelter in our docks. The crew was ill with the winter fever, and the Septon went to see to them himself, giving food and blankets, only to get sick himself. He's feverish and too weak to leave his chamber. He can't conduct regular sermons, nor marry anyone. Your only options are either to fly to a different sept on the mainland, or wait. However, if you are too impatient to do that much, there are other ways to marry. Ways that don't require a septon. You have both dragon riders too, and by coming here, you have the option of having a Valyrian wedding ritual instead. Startled, the two caught each other's eye, first with clear uncertainty, but then Lady Harriel shrugged as if saying, "Why not?" "You said we needed to find a witness, didn't you?" the youth said, her bright eyes crinkling in a sheepish smile. "This is more than standing witness." Aemond's demeanor was more suspicious than it was grateful, perhaps hinting at sharper wits than could be found amongst his older siblings. "We'd still need an officiant, someone who knows the ritual. Are you offering to perform it with us?" he asked. "To host our wedding here at Driftmark?" "I am." On Renice's orders, Driftmark was stirred awake before first light to prepare for a wedding none had expected. They were on a countdown as well. The wedding would start at noon, which left Driftmark some measly 10-ish hours to get everything in order. Outside, time passed as if it was in the same rush as the young couple. going from blackest night to a dark blue sky to the brink of dawn. Despite being the depths of winter, no one could ask for a fairer sunrise. It'd be a cold wedding, but granted the clouds skirting the horizon stayed away, it would be a beautiful one. The castle bustled with preparations, directed according to Rhaenys' specifications, and the only thing slowing it down was getting the bride and groom's cooperation. For practical reasons, Valyrian weddings were held outdoors, not unlike the northern ones. Just as werewolves didn't grow indoors, fitting a dragon, a volcano, or too much fire underneath a roof would sooner make for a funeral pyre than a wedding. Had the weather been gentler, perhaps they'd have trekked out to a deserted spot on the island for the ceremonial portion. But it was winter. Forcing her staff to run back and forth from Driftmark with decorations and everything else needed on such short notice wasn't feasible. Lady Hariel had accepted that easily, but the prince proved more stubborn. Aemond wanted to hold it exactly where he'd become an unburned 4 years previous. That would have been an excellent place. Unfortunately, it also happened to be an hour traveling on foot, with no road for a carriage, and the prince himself was the one rushing this wedding most. He hadn't been too pleased when Rhaenys reminded him of the practical challenges. "We could arrange for it, but you need to give me another day for preparation's sake, Prince Aemond. Men and horses can only move so fast." The prince did not have another day, which solidified Rhaenys' suspicion Lady Hariel was expecting. "Closer proximity to the castle may be more comfortable too," Rhaenys said knowingly to Lady Hariel. "Mayhaps the bride would appreciate that." Hariel tilted her head, not quite following along. "The wedding cup is a rather strong cuisine. It's known to upset the stomach of some dragon lords in the past too." Rhaenys could only imagine what it'd be like to drink that mixture in Hariel's condition. Where Rhaenys had been with child, both times, she'd suffered rather strong fits of illness, struggling to keep anything down. Smells from perfectly normal food could set it off, so for the girl's sake, Rhaenys hoped Lady Hariel wouldn't have that reaction to the bloody concoction within the wedding cup. And still, the bride had yet to catch on to the aid Rhaenys was recommending. "Proximity to the comforts of the castle may be appreciated for easier access to somewhere warm and dry to freshen up," Rhaenys said, not sure how much clearer she could say it without offending Aemond again. "That is true," Lady Hariel said, looking at Aemond as if he would explain this to her. He did not. Was she murmuring being a lackwit, or did Hariel truly not understand? Then again, not all pregnancies were the same, and perchance she was amongst those fabled women who didn't suffer the sickness. Lucky her. "It might not be where Vhagar once dwelled," Lady Hariel said to her groom, "but it's spacious, and it'd be nice to marry somewhere with less sand. And also, if I remember right, isn't this where we first met, Aemond?" The groom relented, and he'd moved on to hammer down the spread for the wedding feast next. Rhaenys needed to inform the kitchen post-haste what was to be prepared. Despite those unnecessary discussions that wasted the precious few hours they had, Rhaenys found she could handle it all, except perhaps too much exposure to the couple themselves. They were unbearably expectant, hopeful and excited, happy. There was only so much Rhaenys could bear when their eager anticipation only intensified her own misery. After spending an hour teaching Hariel her role as the bride in a Valyrian wedding, whilst the ladies rushed to bathe, clean and unknot the bride's surprisingly unruly hair, Rhaenys took her leave to seek a few moments' solitude. With her feet threaded into the grainy sand of the shores and nose filled with the salty twang of the narrow sea, Rhaenys felt the ocean stretch out around her. Should such a beautiful view not evoke some sensation? Objectively, Rhaenys could acknowledge its magnificence, but beyond that it felt a hollow observation. What was the purpose of beauty when there was no one to share it with? The cold air covered her face like a fine veil. The only sign of her moments of grief was the redness of her nose and the frost on her eyelids. She'd suffered loss before. Both her parents died too young, but the grief of their absence hadn't prepared her for Laena's demise. The agony of losing her daughter didn't lessen the pain of having Laenor ripped from her too. The stranger wasn't estranged from her, and no amount of familiarity lessened the pain of its black grip. The distant chatter of the seagulls was muffled by the servants completing the finishing touches for the wedding ritual. The staff were talking in excited mutters, their faces alight with anticipation. It was palpable in the air, yet none of it reached her. Detached from it all, Renice drowned him out and focused on the pounding surf. She closed her eyes, frost-dipped lids dusting her cheekbones, and listened to the lullaby of sailors. The waves lapped against the shore, constant squelch and tumbling water. If she listened hard enough, she could almost hear their whispers. A mother shouldn't outlive her children. It came upon her in waves. Sometimes the grief lapped gently against the shore of her heart before retreating with a low tide. Other instances it rose like a tsunami on a clear day, come to consume her. It wasn't upon her this instant, but the threat felt imminent, as if the next one of Hariel's laughs or another smile from Ament might drown her. Similarly to how solitude left a beautiful sunrise meaningless, Renice stood alone in her grief. Her husband had returned to war and adventure. Their grandchildren were trapped with the murderers who killed their children, and Renice couldn't protect them any more than she could Lena and Lenor. Renice opened her eyes, seeing the horizon expand before her. The sun was rising over the final resting place of her children, the light glimmering like starlight breaking against the waves. The legend said when the sun rose up from the sea, it was sinking in the realm of the Merlin King. To Renice, it only left her guilt-ridden whenever she enjoyed a day's sunrise. Was that not another way to punish her? To know that as the sun warmed her face, her children lay in the cold darkness. What was the point anymore? After all she'd done, how come those naive, stupid children stumbled their way into happiness, whilst after decades of effort, Renice had only misery to show for it? Renice had spent her life making sacrifices in the belief the cost of a war of dragons wasn't worth what she'd stood to gain. Renice had taken the defeat during the Council of 101 with her head held high, telling herself it gave her an air of dignity. Though in truth, likely she'd merely allowed the lords a better view of the devastation across her face. What did they know, though? How naive they were. Without her, they wouldn't be slotting pieces of parchments into a box under misplaced assumptions their opinions mattered. No, without her, they'd be assembling armies and praying to the gods their castles wouldn't be engulfed in dragon fire. It was only because Renice herself had refused to send a milice and fly off to war that kept her husband from launching his fleet against Daemon's hired soldiers and dragon fodder. To claim back her stolen birthright. They would not have acted so haughty if it wasn't for Renice's mercy. But they weren't the only ones mistaken about the situation. In her youthful naivete, Renice had been wary of becoming a kinslayer. Her children had been so small and unbearably fragile, and there was nothing she wouldn't give up to keep them safe. Look at what holding back got her, though. Nothing. The war for the throne never came to pass. Viserys got away with robbing her birthright, and ever since, Daemon saw fit to steal away all the reasons Renice had to hold back, cutting away the barriers between Renice's rage and the world one after the other. He stabbed Laenor in the back to steal his wife. While Laena once had aspirations of dragons, flying free and was raised to be Queen of Westeros, but instead Daemon locked her away in some fat country lord's manse in Essos, without leave to see her kin. He snuffed out her fire before his son snuffed out her life. There was nothing left, and Renice was trapped alone between fire and shadows. Why had her husband left? Where were her children? Her grandchildren? It could have driven anyone to despair, but of late, Renice had been unable to feel much of anything. At least until those two children appeared on her door to stir things up. But mostly it seemed as if the shell of her body remained, but who had made to Renice was fractured beyond repair, and perchance it was for the better. This numbness, It was a shield that kept the world out as much as it kept herself contained. Without it, the wrath would consume her, and Renice would saddle Melis and burn the realm to ash. Mayhaps if it wasn't for her grandchildren, for those babes Lena and Lenor had loved, for their sake, she held back. But the thoughts were there, nestling in her chest, and the fantasy persisted. What if? May I have a word, Aunt? Sir Daeron Velaryon called to her, approaching in quick strides and bringing a finality to Renice's solace. The young knight was helping with the last preparations, but he must have come across an issue that required Renice's opinion. Having so many hands on deck was needed to get everything ready on time, but the rushed efforts couldn't be entirely disguised. It's not as if there was time to produce more of anything they lacked, be it candles, meat, butter, or beverages. Yes, nephew? I know this is a custom, but I must beg you to reconsider the stallion. He's the best one. Anyone else would be better, Aunt. We have some older ones that likely won't last the winter anyway. Wouldn't one of them serve better? Sir Daeron asked hesitantly. As the eldest son of Sir Vaemond, Daeron was a proud Velaryon. He was trained in seafaring and knighthood, but today he was shining a glaring light on his patchy knowledge in their ancient Valyrian custom. He'd seen no need to learn. The young man was recently betrothed to Lady Hazelheart, but the day he said his vows, it'd be in a sept like the majority did south of the neck. It'd be seen as an insult. Renice dismissed. Sacrificing an old sick horse for the ceremony is bad fortune, and it reflects poorly on what sort of quality I wish for their marriage. It'd be the same as saying I wish for them a frail, short and unwell marriage. For this purpose, the more virile, the better. But he's such a fine stallion, Daeron said urgently. In his prime! A sacrifice is only a sacrifice when what's lost is also missed. Otherwise it's no more significant than getting rid of rubble. She paused. Be thankful it's not a dragon, nephew. His eyes widened. A dragon? It's what the tales say, but some texts disagree with each other. Some say they used dragons, more still spoke of human sacrifices, other claimed animals. The exact wedding ritual and why certain things were done was lost with the doom. Knowing she wasn't budging, Daeron headed off, shoulders slumped in defeat as he went to make sure the sacrificial portion of the ritual looked as it should. After a few more moments on her own, Renice pulled herself together, and decided it was time to face her demons again. Demons which had taken a new form on this day, walking about her castle as a couple excited youths. Renice returned to the terrace, schooling her features into a polite mask. Over by the doorway, Lady Hariel was smiling and chatting with a gaggle of ladies about her. A couple were girls Renice had set to assist the bride for the day. Lady Valana Velaryon was a short, plump maiden, insightful for her age, which had come of use to Renice in the few moons the girl had served at high tide. The other assist was Lady Hazelheart, a golden, gorgeous young woman swept up in the excitement of a royal wedding, who'd not been ordered to aid the bride, she'd simply volunteered, eagerly so, and who was Renice to deny such a spirited enthusiasm to duty? Though the rest of the crowd wasn't assigned to be there and had migrated to the bride out of curiosity. She'd assumed they were observing the decorations being put up, but when Renice looked over the ritual circle, she did a double take. What happened? When Renice was here earlier, it had not looked anything akin to this. The ritual circle was where the main portion of a Valyrian wedding took place, described as a circle of fire. This was normally replicated with candles, or even laying a flammable trail of bushes and oil in a wide circle. There is also needed an altar for Renice to place the wedding tray on during the proceedings. That's not quite how it looked now. The railing was decorated with candles, but so many more than Renice had approved of. They couldn't waste all their wick for one wedding, not in winter. But she quickly realized they couldn't all belong to her. Several of the candles were a striking golden color, and most of the flames making up the circle hovered in the air without support. This was magic. Lady Hariel used spells to complete the decorations, Princess Renice. Lady Valana brushed her long, straight silver hair behind her ears as she walked up to meet Renice, her face lit with wonder. The candles and stone statues melted into being before our eyes. It was wondrous, and I've never seen anything akin to it. I wish you could have seen it, my princess. Lady Harriel also magicked a beacon for the ceremony too. Look there. She gestured to the tall and brand new beacon down on the beach. We didn't have to take from our log storage, and she says it won't need to be maintained. Isn't this something out of fairy tales? Renice had approved of a smaller bonfire, as it was part of the wedding too. There simply hadn't been time to construct a larger one. For the less official reason was that he didn't have the wood to spare for an outdoor fire of that size. The timber at Driftmark was needed to heat the castle and for the furnaces in the kitchens. But Renice may as well not have said anything, because Lady Harriel had just made a beacon. It was a large one too. With an encouraging smile, Valena made gentle gestures for her to come closer, reaching out as if she wanted to take her hand. Her hand retracted right before it grazed her arm, sensing Renice wouldn't appreciate it. It's less cold too. You'll feel it if you come further onto the terrace, princess. Please step into the warmth. Mindfully, Renice did. And what a strange sensation it was. Like stepping into milder weather. It was still outside with the sound wind and open air, but the stinging chill was lessened. It made a distinct difference. I see you've been productive. At Renice's understated remark, Lady Harriel turned away from the gaggle of girls. For now, she remained dressed in the traveling gear she'd arrived in. House Valarian had several Valyrian wedding garments to pick from, some passed down by Corlys's ancestors, as well as several more brought back from her husband's 9 voyages, and she'd offered a couple to pick of whichever suited their preferences. They had, but it wasn't time to put it on yet. For the first part of the wedding, it was practical to wear something that handled the strain of hunting. Where's the prince? Aemond is bringing Vermithor. If the prince had gone, then it looked like most was ready. With Harriel's magic, things looked more ready than Renice had expected they'd get. Then all that's left is for your groom to arrive, and then we can start. The bride was still all smiles and crinkling eyes, but her restless shifting around emanated a nervous energy. Brides often were a bit on edge during their weddings, and it seemed the same could be said for those who eloped. There is one more thing, if it's not too much trouble. I should mention that we had a slight mishap earlier with our guards. Harriel's face was set in an apologetic lilt. How so? When we went to wake and tell Sir Eric and Sir Gawain about the wedding, things didn't go as we hoped. Sir Gawain did come around to our way of thinking, as you see, he's right over there. See? Unfortunately, Sir Eric proved more disagreeable. Renice barely refrained from rolling her eyes, and they called themselves knights. The whole of Driftmark had been stirred awake at the hour of the eel, yet those two had been kept blissfully asleep and ignorant through the night. At least Sir Gawain appeared refreshed compared to some of the more sleep-deprived Valarians in attendance. Instead of supporting our choice, Sir Eric expressed the wish to escort us back to King's Landing, which we disagreed with. So I won't bore you with the details, but Aemond and I had to barricade Sir Eric within his chamber. You imprisoned a knight of the King's Guard inside my castle. It's not like we locked him in the dungeon, the bride protested. He's in his chamber. There's water, a chamber pot, he's warm, fed, and it won't be long. We just need to marry before someone lets him out. Once upon a time, Renice would have been scandalized. To think, a Kingsguard was imprisoned in her keep. One of the finest warriors in Westeros, one of the most decorated knights of the Order. His skills at arms honed and his dedication to his art so admired, he was tasked to protect and defend the king's well-being and life. Yet swiftly defeated by 2 petulant children who wouldn't fall in line. Now there was an ironic turn. Aemond gave the order to keep him locked there, but this is your castle. I hoped you would second the instruction to the staff of Driftmark, Lady Harriel asked. would you tell them Sir Eric is not allowed out until after we're wed? Rhaenys glanced skywards when a large shadow appeared in the sky. Vermifor's wings spanned wide as he soared overhead, circling for a place to land. Do as you please. Who am I to question how the prince sorts out his servants? I will second the instructions. Thank you. This was the signal the castle of Driftmark had been waiting for. Excited murmurs sprung up around them as the group shuffled towards the stairs or found a spot along the railing to watch. And not only for that either. Harryl's voice piped up, hesitant. Rhaenys turned back, where Lady Harryl was not watching her groom or going to meet him. Instead, she was not done with their conversation. You have my gratitude, not only for the thing with Sir Eric, but everything, she said. We appreciate this, Princess. Acting the graceful host, Rhaenys smiled courteously. Though we have shared loved ones, the two of us don't know each other very well. Lady Harryl spoke as if she was reciting a practiced statement, though quickly falling off script. I know you think we're only doing this because you mistakenly assume we're expecting. Once again I must stress this is wrong. I'm not with child. This wedding is not because of that. It's not possible because Aemond and I have never done that. Lady Harryl sounded so uncomfortably disjointed, Rhaenys was momentarily inclined to believe her sincere. Regardless of why you believe we're doing this, I appreciate your hospitality. I know we've inconvenienced you. Lady Harryl took a careful pause as she tried to pick the right words. Especially after everything. I know you have more than enough to be going on with. She looked around the terrace, from the ritual ring to the guests. This isn't how I imagined my wedding would go. Though honestly I should have expected the unexpected. When has my life ever gone according to plan? The only constant is that nothing is constant. Still, now that we're here... She nodded back towards the castle, signifying the whole location and not just the terrace deck. I am reminded the only reason I met Aemond is Lady Laena. She's the one who argued Daemon down to take us back to Westeros. And here we met your son. Sir Laenor was always so patient and welcoming with me and Hagrid. I wish he was here. Aemond struggles to express it, but I know he does too. Or else we'd probably have gone elsewhere. It'd be faster to simply marry and accept on the mainland. But marrying here is a way for both of us to feel like we get to invite Sir Laenor to our wedding. Rhaenys' mouth may as well have been soon shut. She tried, but the pressure in her throat was strangling her voice, making it dry and hard to draw breath. Her jaw was so tight it wouldn't open. The bride kept watching her, until she knew something was wrong when the hesitation grew too distinct. By then it was better to remain quiet than to try rectifying the situation. It would only further punctuate her struggles. Lady Harryl was able to guess though. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up your loss. I'm sorry. I just wanted to convey my thanks, but I'll go meet Aemond. With her hands tightened in white-knuckled fists, Lady Harryl dallied for a moment, before making up her mind, and she turned on her heel and walked off. She reached the stairs and skipped down, her ink-black hair trailing on the wind. It was for the better, because the well-meaning sentiment had set it off, and Rhaenys could feel herself unraveling. Fighting for composure, she turned away, gripping onto the nearest wall. She had little choice as she was caught in an abrupt wave of memories. Why did it always fall on her to be the sensible one? The one to hold back from retaliation in the face of disrespect and abuse? When did they forget she was a fire and blood too? Because Laenor should have been here, and he would have, if it wasn't for those... The wave overcame her, and next Rhaenys was pulled under. Gods, curse them all! She hated them. Laena had deserved better than being chained to that ungrateful, spoiled cunt of a prince. And what had Laenor ever done to them? He had never deserved it. He had been their ally, the father of Rhaenyra's true-born children. But he'd known too much. He had tried to be better, and Rhaenyra hadn't allowed that. Daemon coveted Laenor's position, and once it turned out Laenor had opinions that didn't perfectly align with theirs, patience ran out. Who would be next? Perhaps they felt untouchable after Daemon murdered the heir to House Royce, and again when he killed the son of an exiled son of a Sea Lord without a single consequence. But they'd grown overconfident. The king had always protected their treasons and murders, and that hadn't changed. But they had escalated to killing dragon riders now. But that they could ever assume Rhaenys and House Velaryon would accept it, would keep supporting them, was ludicrous. The heir to the throne was dangerously delusional to the reality of her situation. Even a commoner with no understanding of the political games could puzzle out that killing the son of your strongest ally would see their support removed, effective immediately, if not break into war. It would have already come to that, had Rhaenyra showed up to Laenor's funeral parading around her hostages, Rhaenys' grandchildren, most who were kept locked away on Dragonstone. Those fucking cravens cowed behind their human shields, children and babes, acting as if it would be enough to keep Rhaenys under control. Though perhaps Rhaenyra would understand what she'd subjected Rhaenys to if her precious Jaehaerys accidentally ended up fed to Meleys. Perhaps then, the spoiled disgrace would know what happens when she played with fire, with dragon fire. It felt like her children could never rest in peace before justice was served. Rhaenys wanted their murderers to suffer and be humiliated as she had been. She wanted their crimes laid bare, and for everyone to know what frauds and usurpers they were. She wanted Viserys and his whole line to burn, because it was cursed. She wanted to be the one to see it done, and leave the king as the last man standing with the bones of his children and brothers sprawled around his precious seat. He'd be forced to acknowledge what he'd allowed to happen by looking the other way and stuffing his ears with straws. He'd know he was a failure. Nothing but a puppet king who never should have... Princess. The melodious voice sounded so far away, and it wasn't before a hand touched her shoulder that Rhaenys looked up, blinking through watery eyes. Her daughter looked back, a maiden with dark skin, silver hair and lavender eyes. Rhaenys held onto the visage a moment longer, but with a shuddering exhale, she allowed the veil to fall away. Of course this wasn't her dear Laena, she knew that. Her daughter was 4 years dead, and despite being the great-granddaughter of Corlys's cousin, Lady Valarna didn't truly look like Laena. She had the colouring, but short, plump, and with straight silver hair. She didn't look like Rhaena or Baela either. Letting go of the illusion, Rhaenys backed away while wrestling control back of her senses. Mind over heart. Princess Rhaenys, are you well? Do you need to sit down? Should I send for the maester? If she didn't get these kids off her island, Rhaenys may well lose whatever wits remained to her. And if not wits, then her restraints would give out. It was hard to know which would be more devastating. No, Rhaenys said, her voice hoarse. The girl wasn't convinced. If you're unwell, there's others who can take your place as officiant, princess. They'll understand. Sir Vaemond... No, I'm fine, thank you, Valarna. Did you prepare the wedding tray? Yes, princess. Valarna hesitated, looking over Rhaenys' face with deep worry, but wisely decided to back off. I sorted it just as you instructed. Do you want me to bring it to you? Is it time? Aye. During her momentarily distraction, time had moved strangely. It was as if in the blink of an eye, Vermithor was properly settled, and the bride and groom were waiting for the officiant. For her. A part of her hated the sight of Aemond, sickened by his similarities to Daemon, and she was filled with an urge to warn Lady Herial, advise her to saddle her dragon and fly away, leave Westeros behind and never look back, because this marriage would turn every ounce of joy in her life into smoldering anguish. If it wasn't for Baela's precarious position, Rhaenys would have. And yet, Laenor had burned with those two. Not only Lady Herial, but the prince too. They'd been set ablaze in Vhagar's fire, but Laenor had come out of the other side incandescent. The sting of his loss would have hurt regardless, but it was more a waste when for the last 4 years, Laenor had burned brilliantly in everything he put his mind to. After a miserable decade chained to Rhaenyra's side, he'd found the confidence to start breaking free and act for himself. Prioritizing himself, his line and his house, whilst he grew into the man Rhaenys had always known was in there. He had always been her little boy. She'd always loved him, even when he disappointed her. But for these last years he'd eclipsed her every expectation. He'd proven her wrong and capable. And his wife had murdered him for it. For Laenor. She didn't know why the sight of him struck such a nerve in her. Rhaenys could blame it on Aemond being Viserys' son, Rhaenyra's brother and Daemon's nephew. That he treated Baela with disrespect. Except, those things hadn't struck her half as hard mere days ago when she'd seen them at the Red Keep. It was having him here, at Driftmark, in her home, marrying, that was bringing it forth. It hurt. It hurt to be reminded of where Rhaenys had once been. They were a long buried memory of how life had looked before it all went wrong. Of before. Life had been a cruel teacher. In time, they'd learn too. These two. They didn't bring out the best of Rhaenys, but it was noteworthy she could feel more of a numbness too. If only for today, mayhaps she could try to recall what it was like to be 16 and a bride again. Just like Herial, that had once been Rhaenys' story too. Lady Valana returned with a tray. On another day she'd have checked her work. The girl had never put together a Valyrian wedding tray before. But she wanted this to be over. Trusting Valana could follow basic instructions, Rhaenys took the tray, and was relieved she moved steadier on the outside than she felt within. The tray wasn't heavy, but amongst the ribbons and dragonglass, there was also a goblet filled with fire wine after all. Taking one step after the other, Rhaenys walked down the terrace stairs and onto the beach. Sir Gawain and Vaemond had both volunteered to assist, and weren't far behind her. As they neared, Rhaenys watched Herial pat down Aemond's hair after the windy flight, and the prince let her fuss. When her arms fell away, he leaned down and kissed her forehead, then kissed her cheeks in turn, making Herial laugh, which may well have been his intentions. The pleased, awkward smile stuck on his face brought out a youthful warmth. Giggling like a carefree lad, Aemond looked less like Daemon than Rhaenys expected, than most Targaryens during their wedding. She'd know. Rhaenys had seen quite a few Targaryens marry. Viserys and Aemma married in a grand ceremony. Despite Aemma being a girl of 11, she'd followed the wedding instructions perfectly, and Viserys had mostly expressed a relief the estranged cousin he married turned out to be both pretty and dutiful. They'd burned the invitation to the king's second wedding. Though unfortunately she'd attended 2 of Daemon's 3 weddings. The first one to Rhae had been opulent but frigid. The groom had sneered whenever the bride turned to him, and by the time they'd said their vows, the bride was fighting back tears of hurt. The second one had been luxurious too, but intimate. Daemon had been perfectly composed when he married Laena, chin held high and smirking as he stole away the Pearl of Driftmark, never to return the treasure. Aemond and Herial neither behaved nor looked like the visage Baela and Aegon had struck during their wedding either. Everything had been perfect that day. From the locations to the guests to the decorations, and the ceremony had been on point, whilst the perfect bride and groom had gone through the motions. On the king's orders, they'd moved on cue, talked on cue, and smiled politely. Until the hour grew late, the king retired to bed, and the masks fell off. Yet that disaster still hadn't been as doomed as Laenor and Rhaenyra's wedding. Rhaenys recalled vividly how miserable that ended. Tears had streamed down her son's bruised face while he forced out his wedding vows. They'd barely been announced husband and wife before the king collapsed. They should have heeded the warning signs, because the gods may as well have been screaming their protests. It was a cursed union. It was a mistake. But would kings and lords listen to the gods when the warnings went against their insatiable ambitions? No. The disparity was stark between that wedding and this one, and Rhaenys couldn't solely attribute the differences on this being a rushed eloping. This wedding wouldn't be an accept, wouldn't be as grandiose as expected when a prince married, nor be the fairy tale setting girls dreamed of growing up, but it didn't bother them. Perhaps in hindsight they'd think of all the things they'd wish they'd done differently, but in the present, they were just two joyful children excited for the future. Whatever reason they were doing this, a lapse of judgment, a change of situation, or an impatience to grow up, Rhaenys could see the two were infatuated. Who knew? Mayhaps it was love. Reaching within hearing range, Rhaenys heard Lady Harrel using her dragon speech on Vermithor, a sound that made the hairs on her neck stand on end. The noise seemed beyond what a human should be able to imitate. Ariel pointed towards the unlit beacon, as if explaining to the dragon what was going to happen. It was hard to believe, but it truly seemed that was what she attempted, especially when Vermithor hissed back, as if answering. The hissing was not the normal growls a dragon would naturally use. Malice had never made it, and the only times Rhaenys heard the dragon use it was in response to Lady Harrel's call. Are you ready? Aemond nodded to the group. We are. Daeron is waiting for you with his sacrifice. Daeron's here? The prince tilted his head. Not your brother, Sir Gawain said. Not Prince Daeron. I speak of Daeron the Elder, Sir Daeron Velaryon, Rhaenys clarified. Vaemon's son. He's prepared to horse a sacrifice. With the blood, we thought it better to place the site of the slaughter away from the dragons' immediate reach. A wise decision, Princess. Aemond nodded. Vermithor has a particular fondness for horseflesh. Turning away from Vermithor, Lady Harrel's expression faltered. Mayhaps it was from the dawning realization her wedding was about to take place for real. Mayhaps it was from imagining a dragon swooping down and robbing them of a wedding dinner. Or mayhaps it was the idea of killing a horse. Whatever the cause, the bride's perky happiness fell away, a contrast to her groom, whose sharp smile never faltered. Vermithor! Aemond called, perhaps a tad superfluous, when the dragon was already alert. The prince pointed towards the beacon. Dracarys! The air rippled around Vermithor's great jaws before a scorching exhale sent a fiery blast across the sandy beach, engulfing the wooden structure in an inferno, lighting the beacon. Once Rhaenys was confident Vermithor wouldn't breathe any more fire, she walked up to the beacon with the wedding candle to light it in the dragon fire, signaling the beginning. The groom entwined his fingers with his bride, heading towards the first part of the wedding. Rhaenys lingered by the beacon, placing the wedding candle securely inside the lantern on the tray. She watched the silver-haired prince and the black-haired witch walk ahead. Taking strength from the flame in a last prayer, Rhaenys followed. Ariel. Ariel once told herself she'd prefer a Valyrian wedding than mimic the spectacle of Bella and Aegon's wedding held in the traditions of the Seven. At present though, all she could think was how, if they'd married in a sept, that poor horse would have been fine. They were strolling up the beach, returning to the castle, and finished with the part Ariel had dreaded most, even if the rhythmical brush of Aemond's thumb over her knuckles was comforting. He'd been a proud silver stallion until they had killed him as a sacrifice, drained drops of blood into the wedding cup, and now the horse was being prepared for the feast. Aemond wasn't affected the way she was. He'd been exposed to butchers killing animals since before he could remember. He agreed the horse was a fine one, yet it didn't bother him to slaughter it in the name of his ancestral traditions. It's not that Harel didn't know the realities of life or seen that before. She'd lived hand to mouth in Essos for a year. Collecting enough food to suffice for a growing baby dragon and a half-giant for a year had been no picnic. She knew where the meat on her plate came from. Even so, there was always something indescribably sad about killing a being that still had so much life left in them. Her fingers tingled, imagining there remained a ghostly trail where the warm horse blood had dripped over her hands. despite having wiped them after the deed. Her head whirling, they climbed up the stairs of Driftmark. Ariel barely got inside the door before being ambushed by a couple ladies laying in waiting. The two assigned to help her was a Valarian cousin named Valana, who had a knack for sorting out the wildest of requests, and the other was Lady Hazel Hart. As the betrothed of Sir Daeron, Hazel and her mother were guests at Driftmark, but she somehow gotten roped into helping anyway. Together, the two pulled Ariel away, and the last she glimpsed of Aemond was as he got pulled down in the opposite direction by his uncle and a couple of Valarian cousins. As they walked, the ladies tucked and loosened her riding attire. They likely would have undressed her in the hallway hadn't Ariel fastened her pace. Once the chamber door thudded shut behind them, Ariel allowed them to take control, subduing any shyness. It wasn't the nakedness. For years, Ariel lived, cleaned and dressed alongside other girls and gotten familiar with less privacy than the English expected. However, she was usually the person helping princesses getting dressed, than being the one attended to by others. Whilst Lady Valana went over her body with a wet cloth, Lady Hazel tackled her hair. Once scrubbed free of stray traces of blood splatters, Valana brought over the gown, getting it almost less complicated on the second try than on her initial fitting at dawn, but only because they'd done a practice round. It was still a rather uncomfortable experience to be dressed by Valana at the same time as Hazel clung to her hair with an iron grip, fully absorbed in her task to braid the headpiece securely to her scalp. That did not stop Valana from using her short stature to her advantage, flittering in between and around the both of them. She circled the skirt over Ariel's shift, then wrapping the top piece, the draping overcoat, and securing the waist belt. Ariel's duty throughout this was to keep her head still, arms raised and stand a steady pillar in the middle of the constant tugging. A moment of weak knees would result in them all toppling over in a heap. Far faster than expected, it was done. When Ariel looked into the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The gown was white, with an inner layer of red peeking out underneath her sleeves, bottom hem and collar. Despite appearing clean and simple compared to some gowns she'd seen at court, the extravagance lay in the details. White flame and dragon embroideries sprawled across the white textile, with white silks and lace layers. What pronounced the details wasn't color, but the play between the coarseness and the glossy textures. The headpiece was intricately woven, with golden discs and red silk threads embroidered together in intricate spirals. It was not as tall as the one Rhaenyra wore for her wedding. That one had been triangular, more akin to a crown. Hers was smaller, rounded around her head like a halo, with dangling threads of fine golden chains falling just above her shoulders, framing her face. Though her wedding was held in the Valyrian customs too, and her gown was of a related style, it wasn't identical to the one Rhaenyra and Daemon wore. She wasn't sure why she'd expected they would be. Even if the majority of English brides wore white dresses with a veil, they didn't all wear the exact same dress. It was the same here. The base elements were similar, but she'd never mistake this for Rhaenyra's. Ariel's gown was of lighter fabrics and a brighter white. Her white sleeves draped down past her knees. A thick, decorated belt sat around her waist, and the skirt fell in purposefully designed folds down her legs. It was so pretty, steeped in Valyrian traditions and countless symbolism that absolutely flew over Ariel's head. She'd probably ask Aemond to decipher them for her later, and yet... Ariel stared into the mirror, but struggled to see a bride. Which was plain wrong. Ariel was 1/3 married already, and regardless of what she was wearing, that made her a bride. Though her black hair contrasted hard against the pale gown, Ariel still looked like the bride of Aemond Targaryen. The attire was authentic and lovely, and with some adjustment spells, it now fit her perfectly. It was just... Despite how gorgeous and crisp the gown was, this was not what she thought brides looked like. And oddly enough, she somehow felt like she was wearing Dudley's hand-me-downs again. She was grateful for her niece's generosity, but this was never what she pictured when thinking the words, her wedding. Not what she'd expected back in England, nor did it much look like the styles she'd grown familiar with in Westeros either. This was yet another cultural curveball, and the exotic style highlighted the feeling of being wrapped in someone else's cloak. This wedding was consumed by Targaryen history and traditions. Aemond was having a blast with this, while Ariel felt like an intruding foreigner, dressed in a pretty costume, made to blend in on a stage she didn't belong. This dress, like everything else, was borrowed. "You know you look stunning, don't you, Lady Ariel?" Valana asked. "Breathtaking." Hazel patted down her hair, looking over the braids with the gaze of a hawk. "If he didn't before, the prince must fall in love with you now." Valana tilted her head, looking over Ariel again. "I declare you stand a true Valyrian flame." Ariel smiled weakly, feeling a little better to hear that from someone with Valyrian ancestors. She looked back into the mirror, turning this way and that. Was this uncertainty really about the dress? Or was it the wedding? Did she regret it? No. No. Considering the drama leading up to this, what sort of gown Ariel wore was such a superfluous detail to get hung up on. She should stop thinking about it and focus on enjoying the day. This wasn't just any wedding. It was their wedding. Ariel knew their future wouldn't stay uncomplicated. But for today, she wasn't going to worry about the many whats, ifs and buts. She'd made up her mind. They were getting married. It was happening. And it achieved little but ruining the day for herself and Aemond if she focused on the negative. Ariel could worry about consequences another day. Politics, protests, consequences. She wouldn't even dwell on their young ages. This day was theirs. This wedding was for them. And she was going to enjoy being a bride. If she was to get lost in thoughts about anything, it was the wondrous realization that Aemond genuinely wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. It hadn't merely been flowery talk. He was keeping good on his words. So who cared what her dress looked like? She'd marry Aemond, enjoy the feast, and have a great celebration. Like a Quidditch after party. Honestly, after spending her life getting tossed around different cultures, from the Muggle world, then the magical world, to being a commoner in Essos, a guest of a prince in Essos, a ward of a princess on Dragonstone, Ariel's opinion on the different dress codes was rather flexible, and her personal preferences had turned into a cultural fusion. It took excessive amount of eccentricities before she thought anything looked odd anymore. So why on earth was this getting to her now? And would it be so bad if she tweaked a few of the details? Just a tiny little bit. "Could you hand me that, please?" Ariel pointed to her backpack. Hazel handed it over with a quizzical smile. Thoughtful, Ariel took out one of her handkerchiefs. She may be having a Valyrian wedding, following Aemond's family traditions in Westeros. But for this one day, what of her traditions? Ariel had never attended an English wedding, but she'd seen her parents' wedding photos. On the thank you card they'd written Hagrid, the moving photograph showed her father in a set of dress robes, while her mother had worn a white gown with a veil. Ariel was wearing white already, but she couldn't see a reason why she shouldn't add a veil too. She could have that much. Scrubbed, dressed and styled, Ariel was finally deemed appropriate by Valana and Hazel, and allowed to finish getting married. Stepping back out, she heard voices drifting up the hallway, stemming from a small crowd waiting by the terrace door. Ariel broke into a smile when she met Aemond's eyes, slightly startled by how different he looked. Aemond nearly always wore black or dark attires, therefore the stark change from that to these white groom's robes took a moment to adjust to. "I've never seen you in white," Ariel smiled. "You look so dapper." He stood with arms crossed behind his back, his posture perfect, like always. But at the remark his chin jutted out, arms falling to his side as he came over to meet her. His eyes roamed over her attire. "You look beautiful, my love." Aemond reached out to touch her veil, giving her the same quizzical look the ladies wore while helping her secure it in place. "This isn't traditional." "Mayhaps it's not Valyrian," Ariel said, hoping he wouldn't object to this last-second change. Then again, there hadn't been much time to arrange this. "Not Westerosi either." Aemond arched a brow. "Veils are for funerals." "The black veils, yes," Ariel said. but in Britain, wearing a white veil was traditional for weddings, particularly during the ceremony. I wanted to honor that. Even with years of lessons in sewing and making gowns, it took Ariel several tries to find the correct enchantment to merge the style of the veil with the Valyrian gown, to make the clash of two cultures look connected, even though wearing veils wasn't a wedding thing here. The closest would be a maiden's cloak, but that wasn't Valyrian either. Aemond fidgeted lightly with the veil, running his hands over the magically woven material, careful not to ruin the ladies' hard work securing it. It looks very fine, he mused. Do I need one too? Ariel laughed. No, you're perfect as is. Ahem. Rhaenys drew attention by clearing her voice. Ariel was relieved the color had returned to Rhaenys' face, and that her expression was less pinched. It seemed the princess was doing better, though it was hard to tell with her. She was always composed. Rhaenys held out a ceremonial tray, a wooden one with carved seahorse handles with a bottom sheet of dark velvet spilling over the edges, making the presentation of the dragonglass dagger, 2 ribbons, the wedding cup, the candle which had been burning since the start of the wedding, appear more official. Shall we begin? Rhaenys asked in Valyrian. Last chance to jump on Vermiford and flee, my prince, Ser Daeron japed to Aemond, his grin wicked. The room laughed, drowning out some of Ariel's nervous giggles. Why are you still here? Rhaenys asked dryly. Make yourself useful, nephew, and keep the door open for them. No one could fault Daeron's compliance. The knight skipped up to the door, holding it ajar with an innocent smile as he let everyone out, winking at Lady Hazel when she was the last to leave after Sir Gawain. The lady giggled as she disappeared out the door, her long golden hair flowing in perfect curls behind her. He's right, Ariel joked. Last chance to run. Aemond smirked, offering his elbow. Linking her arm through Aemond's, they headed out. Going from the dim hallway to bright daylight made her eyes sting. Ariel's eyes fluttered to adjust, and when it cleared, she saw the white powder falling around them. It had started to snow. Her arm tightened around Aemond's, momentarily stressing out, until she recalled she'd enchanted the area, so it'd likely be fine. No one would freeze and get sick. Besides, the coverage wasn't too thick, and hopefully it would pass. For now, though, the snowflakes falling softly over the circle of fire had a beauty of their own too. A peaceful duality of white and red, of cold and warm. Arm in arm they walked past the crowd of guests while Ariel took in each of their faces in turn, feeling a wave of warmth for each of them. Hazel joined Ser Daeron and his brother Damien by their father Vaemond. Valana stood with another group of Valarian cousins, amongst them Melantine and Rogar Valarian. They had the Maester of Driftmark and a local Septa in attendance as well, the latter whom seemed torn between fascination and concern. Further back were the household knights too, and Ariel grinned as she caught the eye of old Ser Doran. Together they stepped into the ritual circle, stopping by the low altar. Aemond and Ariel turned to face each other while Rhaenys took her place on the other side of the altar. The crowd shifted closer, the non-stop beyond the confines of the fiery circle. Behind the nobles gathered on the terrace, she could see servants peeking out from the doors and windows. Ariel caught the eye of a little boy sitting on his mother's shoulders for a better vantage point, and she smiled. He grinned back, waving excitedly. All of them had been so wonderful. Yet, she didn't truly know anyone here except the one she was marrying. Suddenly, Ariel missed Hagrid something fierce. It was like a physical twinge in her guts how badly she wished he was here too. Leaning close, she whispered, "Do you wish your mother was here?" Aemond's eyes broke away, briefly flickering towards the horizon. A little. It was nice to imagine everyone being here to celebrate with them, except their pessimistic side insisted they'd made the right choice, because one had to wonder if their wedding would stay celebratory if Aemond's family was on the guest list. In a perfect world, they'd all be invited, have fun, enjoy the feast and celebrate. but in reality, there was a higher likelihood someone would lose an eye than for House Targaryen to get through an event peacefully. Laena's funeral, Laenor's funeral, Aegon and Bella's wedding. There was an unfortunate track record that couldn't be ignored. Every time House Targaryen attended the same events, be them funerals or weddings, they ended up making it about themselves. What brought them together became secondary or forgotten entirely, as everything never failed to derail into family drama and political scandals. And that didn't sound like a particularly nice wedding either. In a way, by excluding their closest friends and family, Ariel's and Aemon's wedding ended up being about little else but them. She could only hope Hagrid would understand. Rhaenys looked somberly between them, wetting her lips before she raised her voice for everyone to hear, even if maybe not all could understand the Valyrian flowing smoothly off her lips. From the striking of a first spark, a flame can be created. It will grow to a mighty fire that burns its course until there is nothing left but dwindling ash. This is the ways of fire as it is the way of life. We are gathered here today to witness a binding of lives, a wedding in fire and blood of two dragon riders, come to bind themselves from spark to flame to ash. Who is the groom come before the 14 fires? It is I, Aemond answered in Valyrian. Aemond of House Targaryen. Rhaenys turned to Hariel, her voice carrying across the terrace. Whom is the bride come before the 14 fires? It is I, Hariel of House Potter. Valyrian weddings were called rituals for a reason. It could be described as ceremonial, but the fire, blood, sacrifices and symbolic values made the ritualistic part rather prominent. The sacrifices were threefold: an offered life, offered blood, and offered promises. Cutting their lips was a trust exercise, because they had to do it to each other. The dragon glass dagger was sharp, but using too little pressure would still only make a shallow cut. If it didn't bleed, that was seen as not committing, but putting a bit too much pressure and they'd end up with cleft lips. Briefly, her gaze narrowed warningly when he placed the blade to her lip, which he responded to with an amused smirk, as if saying, "Relax, I've got this." He did. They got through it together, before Aemon dipped his finger in the wedding cup, using his strained finger to draw the symbol for blood on his own forehead and fire on Hariel's, covering her scar in the sacrificial blood. A heat spread like a flush from her toes to her ears. She was no longer concerned with the falling snow further than speculating on the aesthetics when they caught on Aemon's hair and eyelashes. With her lips split and blood on her tongue, Hariel watched Aemon rest the dragon glass against his palm. Hariel followed suit, pulling the dagger across her hand in a line. Blood trickled out, giving Hariel a sudden sense of déjà vu at the sight of her cut hand, though for the life of her she couldn't say why. Rhaenys made them repeat Valyrian prayers while the fire flared around them, the torches crackling, the candles fizzling whenever a snowflake was caught too close to the heat. She'd never truly noticed until that moment how tantalizing fire was, and when she looked closer, Hariel almost imagined there were shapes moving in their depths. The circle of fire burned stronger, framing Aemon's outline in a warm glow. He'd never looked more a prince. They clasped their bleeding hands, their wounds rubbing against the other. It had been dawning on her gradually, from the horse sacrifice to the little offering to the ritualistic repetitions and prayers, but this felt peculiar, not just because the primitive ritual was so different. This was a different sort of weird. Hariel watched curiously while Rhaenys picked the last item of the wedding tray, a long ribbon, ready to initiate the handfasting. Rhaenys looped the band around their bleeding hands, finishing the wrapping by tucking the ends neatly between each of their thumbs. Once everything was in place, Aemon's fingers tightened around hers, and together they squeezed. The text said to signify the unification of their bloodlines. Hands throbbing, their mingled blood dripping into the wedding cup Rhaenys held underneath. Simultaneously, a ghostly breath filtered through Hariel, and her skin erupted into goosebumps. Had she imagined it? Or was it merely getting married that made her feel so warm, that made her head feel heavy and her skin tingly? It was hard to compare it to anything, except maybe a memory of brewing potions in a castle dungeon. The befuddling effect of staying too long in an enclosed space filled with heavy, circling fumes and bubbling brews. Magical, but still not entirely her magic. Potions could be summarized in a simplified way with the saying, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts," but it didn't make the parts worthless. The ingredients were pieces of an incomplete spell, and like a blacksmith, a potioneer molded them into multi-component forms of magics that were often versatile beyond what a wand could accomplish alone. The power was constructed step by step, and the hints of it hovered understated amidst the heavy air of the dungeon. Easy to miss, but always there. There was something similar happening here. There was a hint in the air, a presence hovering over the ritual, tingling over their cut hands, lingering like an indescribable aroma at the roof of her mouth. Blood of two, joined as one, ghostly flame and song of shadows, two hearts as embers, forced in 14 fires, a future promised in glass. The stars stand witness, the vows spoken through time, of darkness and light. Renice recited prayers Harold didn't hear. She'd just been handed the wedding cup and contemplated the implications. Was she making something of nothing? Or was this how the Dragon Lords of Old Valyria cast magic? Was potions the right word for it? What would happen when she drank this? What a peculiar sensation this was. What a strange form of magics the Valyrians tangled with. Could it be some sort of blood potion? Her first year potion book mentioned blood could make for potent effects. One thing was horse blood, but what did human blood do? Then again, it's not as if this was boiled, stirred and brewed in a cauldron. Yet. With the briefest hesitation, Harry lifted the goblet to her lips. It tasted like bitter fire with an aftertaste of spicy blood, and erupted when it reached the back of her tongue. Eyes watering, Harry swallowed forcibly. The liquid slivered like hot, smoky snakes down her throat. Aemon's thumb brushed over the back of her hand, anchoring her back into the moment. He was signaling her, as Harry had been clutching hard at his hand, making blood ooze from their wounds while she half expected something to happen. Except nothing did. The heat in her throat ceased, everything remained the same, and Harry was curiously both relieved and disappointed at the anticlimactic results. She passed the goblet to Aemond, feeling a bit silly and dramatic. Whatever she felt, it was likely the magic already here. Vermithor was lazying on the beach, as she'd used her fair share of spells in the ritual circle earlier. And getting married felt a little magical too. Ariel had been a witch her whole life. Magic was her bread and butter, and she ate of it every day. But she only had today to get married. Ariel and Aemond were promising to spend their lives together, to love and protect one another, to be there when things got hard, which it so often was, but it would be less so when they had each other's back. Aemond had such a fierceness about him. There had been times that intensity frightened her, but Ariel knew she had an intensity that frightened others too. He could drive her crazy as thoroughly as he could drive her joyous. Life would never be boring, and she was in this with him. She loved him, and she'd show him so for the rest of their lives. They were getting to the grand finale. This was not the time to get distracted. Whatever trace of Valyrian blood magic this ritual invoked, it could bloody well wait. She was getting married right now, and nothing but Aemond deserved her undivided attention. Maybe she and Aemond could puzzle it out together later. It could be their first puzzle as husband and wife. Ariel watched as Aemond took his own sip from the wedding cup, and grinned from ear to ear as he failed to keep a straight face. He swallowed it quickly, but not without wincing. Renice waited until she was sure Aemond wasn't at risk of throwing up, before she continued. You may now tie the knot. After making sure the ribbon still lay correctly, they slid their hands apart, taking along their individual ends of the ribbon as they went, forming a knot and tightening it. From a spark to flames to ashes, Rhaenys said. From today to the day your embers turn to ash, each of you will be companion to the other, burning together. You are two bodies, but there is only one life before you. It was almost over now. A thrill rolled around in her stomach, clearing her mind as she recognized their cue. Praying she wouldn't mess up any of the words, Hariel and Aemond spoke their vows to each other. As one. With this spark, I promise to love and cherish you. Rhaenys carefully tilted the candle towards the wedding cup. The cup contained the blood of 3 sacrifices, but those ingredients merely added a few drops to the top. The rest had been fire wine, an aptly named beverage. When the candle flame touched the liquid, the concoction burst into fire, and they recited the second line together. With this flame, I promise to be yours faithfully, through summer and winter, in plenty and want, in joy and sorrow, in sickness and health. Holding each end of the bloody wedding knot, they gave their last offering by casting the ribbon into the fiery cup. The mixture sizzled and greedily consumed the added fuel. Hariel blinked repeatedly, since she could see a face in the fire. She could hear it too. Not now. This was not the time. She reached out, taking Aemond's hand. At once he pulled her closer, and the image thankfully faded away. Relieved, Hariel took a deep breath and joined him in the final vow. Till death do us part, as ashes in the hearth, these are my solemn vows to you. It was done, and Hariel couldn't look away from Aemond's brilliant smile. You have made your vows in fire and blood, Rhaenys declared, binding yourself as husband and wife in holy matrimony. His free hands pulled back her veil to brush over her cheek, head tilting down until their mouths found each other, and Hariel readily sunk into the embrace. Yesterday was done. Tomorrow couldn't yet touch them, and this achievement was nothing but lovingly victorious. The kiss started warm and tender, where neither let themselves be hampered by the sting from their cut lips. If anything, it only fueled it, the way a pinch of bitter salt could make sugar sweeter. Their first kiss as man and wife grew as intense as Aemond himself was, holding promises of unfolding dreams and tasting like wine and blood.